science presentations. We typically do them in the spring and then in the fall and then in the spring, and I feel like this is the third time that we've done this in a kind of formal capacity. So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming. And we're here to listen to the work that several of our graduates in the master's program in Literature, Language, and Humanities have been working on for the past year. Tonight we will have three presenters. Up first will be Alyce Sustko, and then Ann Stedman, and then finally, the first time that we're doing this kind of presentation, Ellen Kay will be giving us a kind of provisional sense of her work in progress. She's going to be finishing in the summer. Okay? So my name is Tanya Howe. I direct the program, and thank you all for coming. And there's food and wine and some cheese and meats and things like that in the back, and so definitely do, if you want to grab anything, definitely do take a moment to do so. And in the meantime, though, we are going to get started. I'm going to call Alyce up. Alyce Sustko is graduating this year in the with a Master of Arts in Literature and Language, and she's going to be presenting on Pottermania, the influence of the postmodern sacred in American mass culture. And this project was directed by myself, and the second reader was Dr. Kathleen Garces-Foley. So welcome, Alyce.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome. Again, my name is Alyce Sustko. This is my thesis project, Exploring Pottermania, the influence of the postmodern sacred in American mass culture. I'd just like to take a quick moment to say thank you very, very much to my thesis advisors, Dr. Howe and Dr. Garces-Foley. They were extremely helpful throughout this process, so thank you so much. My paper is going to discuss how religion influences culture using the Harry Potter series as an example of how mass culture can subvert religious hierarchy. I will examine how Rowling blends the concepts of good and evil, fate and free will, the soul, and magic with the Christ figure, all of which are generally present in the Christian and pagan traditions, but vary in the specifics. I will analyze how Rowling brings together the seemingly different elements from these religious traditions in a way that feels both familiar, but also exposes religious hierarchy in American culture. M. McCavan writes, "We live in the world of the virtual in which the media permeates everything and everyone. People within a society normally take their own culture for granted. They rarely question the structures governing their lives. It's very hard to see the mechanisms that create, reproduce, and substantiate your own culture. Because you are a part of it, it becomes naturalized to you. The job of cultural theorists is to pull apart and analyze the what and the why of culture in order to defamiliarize these processes." I'll be discussing the idea of culture in the Marxist sense, which is what people produce and the manner in which they produce it. The whole idea of culture becomes wrapped up in the system of production. Capitalism, which supports the exchange and sale of products for consumption, acts as a base for the superstructure, culture itself. As a result of the intersection between production and capitalism, there is an industry devoted to the manufacturing and sustaining of culture. We call this the culture industry. The culture industry, or the base, works to produce objects of mass culture, which we will define as objects that transmit information across a large group using mass media. Because mass culture reproduces and reinforces the norms and ideologies of the superstructure, it can be used as a tool of control by reinforcing and reproducing social hierarchy. Consumers are socialized to consume in particular ways that promote ideologies suitable to the sustainability of the base. These processes work together to maintain a culture, but they work without our knowledge. However, objects of mass culture do not signify monolithically, and we can read them in multiple ways. As products of a cultural logic that has internal flaws or contradictions, mass culture often reproduces those fault lines, which the cultural critic can show or exploit. Such habits of reading can show how objects of mass culture can serve to resist the very systems that they typically reinforce. The analysis of such objects will invariably reveal structures that would otherwise remain invisible, yielding information about our culture that we would otherwise be unaware of. In the case of contemporary American mass culture, the Harry Potter franchise recently underwent over a decade-long span of mass appeal. The Potter series' staggering popularity, a worldwide literary phenomenon and prompter of Pottermania in the United States, suggests that something within the series clearly resonates with readers. Yet the series also generated profound critique. largely from Christian conservatives. If we do our job as cultural theorists, we must not take Harry's popularity for granted. We must consider what invests the series with such power and what relevance it has to dominant American ideologies. Although the Potter series does serve to support many social hierarchies, it contains subversive elements as well, particularly in its pastiche of religious imagery from apparently divergent traditions. The blending of religious elements, in this case Christianity and paganism, complex terms which are for the purpose of this paper used in the broadest sense, creates a mixture that I shall refer to in M. McCadden's terms as the postmodern sacred, or a postmodern version of religious traditions. The blending of these traditions appears vaguely comfortable and familiar to consumers, as it reproduces elements that have themselves been endlessly reproduced until they have become normalized within the culture. Though seemingly disparate, this mixture serves to make religious elements culturally pervasive. We don't recognize things as Christian or pagan anymore, they're just normal or background. Despite this familiarity, the Potter series has been vigorously condemned by Christian conservatives. On the one hand, the series has mass appeal to a broad range of people, but on the other, it produces extreme discontent. How can those conflicting reactions cohere? Because while the series maintains some status quo, it works subtly to critique others, maximizing its appeal and yet causing a problem for those who are threatened by the possibility of religious pluralism. This combination levels the authority of these individual narratives. They no longer function as a hierarchy. The postmodern sacred renders them as equal. According to John Killinger, author of The Life, Death, and Resurrection of Harry Potter, in 2011 the Potter novels approached 400 million copies sold, and they've been translated into more than 60 languages. Rowling's books have the most remarkable publishing record of all time, except perhaps for the Bible and a handful of other holy texts. For those of you who aren't sure of, or you can't appreciate the magnitude of Pottermania, or if you've been living under a rock for the last decade or so, I have some facts and figures for you just so you can wrap your mind around how big the series was. First of all, American publishers paid $105,000 for the manuscript of the first novel. That is the highest ever paid figure for a children's book, and especially for a first-time author. The second novel debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which again was a first for a children's book. And the first 3 novels then rotated in the top 3 spots for 80 weeks, which caused huge drama because they had to actually split the list into genre so that other authors could be represented. But the rest of the series met with this extreme success. And the Potter franchise also released 8 feature-length films. Every single one of the films reached the top 5 or better spot for the highest grossing film in the year of its release. And all 8 of the movies are in the top 100 grossing movies of all time, as shown in this chart. The movies were also really cleverly marketed because it was like every 6 months or every year something new from Harry Potter was released, so it really served to generate this like profound, long-lasting hype for over 10 years, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. The franchise also sold a vast array of merchandise to fans. Everything from replica wands, costumes, bottles of Hogwarts, brooms, candy, the list goes on and on. Anything from the series that could be reproduced and sold was. And I forgot, but I have that wand and I was going to bring it and show you. So people do buy them. And believe it or not, Harry actually has his own theme park. The Wizarding World of Harry Potter opened at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida in 2010. It features many Potter-themed rides, shops, and experiences. Additionally, there is now a Harry Potter museum. It's called the Harry Potter Exhibition, and it has traveled around the world. It features most of the props, costumes, and other artifacts used in films. So you should check that out if you're a fan. Melissa Anelli writes that the Potter series is a worldwide enterprise that has been crammed into every crevice of popular culture, and has become so absorbed into pop culture that it appears inside other pop culture references. This is one example. I'm sure you're all familiar with The Simpsons, which is itself an example of a very popular show.
And Harry Potter and all his wizard friends went straight to hell for practicing witchcraft.
So this is just one example of many, but Harry Potter is everywhere within our culture. And so I'm going to show you another really entertaining clip. For those of you who haven't read the books or seen the movies, you totally should. But this is a fun synopsis. It's called Harry Potter in 99 Seconds, and it's a kid on YouTube who's singing the plot synopsis to the musical tune for each movie. So, I hope you enjoy.
There once was a boy named Harry, destined to be a star. His parents were killed by Voldemort, who gave him a lightning scar. You know, Harry, you're a wizard. Harry goes to Hogwarts, he meets Ron and Hermione. McGonagall requires he from a Gryffindor. Draco is a daddy's boy, Paul becomes unemployed. His sorcerer son is destroyed by Dumbledore. Ron breaks his wand, now Jenny's gone, and Harry's in mortal danger. Tom Riddle hides his snake inside his ginormous secret chamber. And goes up and barge. The Voldemort's come and take charge. Lupin is a wolf, the ransom man, and now the prisoner is at large. They use time travel so they can save the prisoner of Azkaban, who just so happens to be Harry's godfather. I don't really get it either. Harry gets put in the Triwizard Tournament. The dragons and mermaids don't know, and we're calling them slaves. Revolutionary Harry Dumbledore, why is he ignoring your constant attempts to contact him? He is forced to leave the school, but your eyes make goes a fool. He's drinking with a hidden mystery, serious black as this can be. Oh, split your soul, 7 parts of a whole. There are crises, it's Dumbledore's end. There once was a boy named Harry who constantly conflicted. But in one final rule between good and bad, he may take his final breath.
So hopefully, if you haven't seen the movies or read the books, that will convert you a little bit. But just because that was really fast, I'm just going to very quickly summarize the series. Harry Potter is born to wizarding parents who are then murdered by, you saw, evil Lord Voldemort, because Voldemort hears a prophecy that says Harry is going to be his downfall. Harry somehow escapes with his life and spends the next 11 years growing up thinking he's normal. At the age of 11, he discovers that he's actually a famous wizard and he attends Hogwarts Wizarding School. He spends the next 7 books trying to foil all sorts of evil plots that all aim at reinstating Voldemort's power. And eventually Voldemort does come back and Harry has to vanquish him. Spoiler alert. Unfortunately, that requires Harry giving up his life, which he does, but luckily for us, he manages to escape death for the millionth time and returns to finish off Voldemort. So that is the synopsis. And now that we have talked a little bit about Harry, we're going to talk more about the postmodern sacred that I mentioned earlier. The term describes the version of religion that is portrayed by the media and consumed by the masses. It draws on normalized versions of religion, blending these elements from different traditions and breaking down normative ideology. This poses a threat to the centrality of a norm, which is why many conservative religious groups, namely Christian conservatives, advocate so strongly against objects of mass culture that exhibit the postmodern sacred. The Harry Potter series is an example of a postmodern sacred blend in that it demonstrates the collapse of polarized religious traditions into a merged postmodern version. If we examine the series closely, there are many examples of a postmodern sacred framed in a manner that destabilizes religious hierarchy. In these scenes, Rowling offers these seemingly incongruent elements equitably. She refuses to privilege either the Christian or the pagan, choosing to circumvent the hierarchy altogether. We can read these moments as subversion in that they promote cohesion rather than difference, implying that neither tradition has a singular claim on truth. This, of course, runs counterintuitive to the belief that Christianity has a stronghold on truth in American culture and subtly critiques not only this dominant ideology, but also the systems in place that maintain it. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the postmodern sacred in the text. On the surface, when we look at the text, it seems like it's an epic battle between forces of good and evil that's moving the plot. And in this battle, Rowling clearly privileges good. The conflict between the Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters makes the story. It sets up the binary of good and evil, with both forces working to overpower the other. In the Christian tradition, believers engage in a continual progression towards goodness. It seems easy to write off Rowling's story as supporting this binary version. But if we look deeper, examining good and evil on a character basis, instead of as groups of conflicting people, it really complicates the binary. Since evil in the pagan tradition is not the opposition of good, but rather a natural balance of the two forces, Rowling uses this view of good and evil as counterparts and applies it to her characters. Though many of the characters display this blend, I will focus on 3 primary characters: Harry, Dumbledore, and Snape, and the manner in which they project this balance. Rowling's incorporation of good and evil as both oppositional on the surface and balancing underneath exemplifies her use of the postmodern sacred blend to subvert hierarchical ideas about religious traditions as produced by mass culture. Although he represents a superior level of goodness, Harry must often balance his desire to do the right thing with his natural human tendencies toward anger, jealousy, hatred, and deceit. Harry feels anger, and rightfully so, with many of the characters who mistreat him. He feels hatred towards Snape, Malfoy, his relatives, and at times, he even becomes angry and frustrated with his friends. Our protagonist clearly contains a balance of good and evil tendencies, making him an example of this postmodern sacred blend. Readers view Dumbledore as the ultimate paragon of goodness throughout the series. He works tirelessly to thwart the forces of evil and to support our hero on his journey to defeat Lord Voldemort. After his death, a reporter writes a tell-all memoir challenging our notion of him as a benevolent figure, revealing Dumbledore's alliance with the dark wizard Grindelwald and his plot to overpower and rule the wizarding world. Rowling complicates the construct of good and evil as a clear-cut separate entity by showing us that even in the most loved, trusted people, there's a balance of good and evil. My favorite, Snape. Harry never trusts Snape. Other characters intimate that he has a proclivity towards the dark arts, and we learn that Snape was a former Death Eater, which makes our view of him as an evil character more substantial. At the end of the series, however, we learn that Snape loved Harry's mother from childhood, and he worked as a double agent for Dumbledore after her death, risking his life every day to save her son. Although it makes it easy to dislike him throughout the series because of his actions, in the end he's possibly the most heroic character, making him probably the most complex blend of good and evil. As recipients of endless reinforcement of the Christian good-evil binary via its proliferation through mass culture, readers find this concept familiar and thus appealing, and this is why we love the story. The postmodern sacred blending reaffirms the importance of the normalized good-evil concept while subtly deconstructing it through the blend with the pagan version of balance, toppling the Christian hierarchy. Rowling approaches the seemingly dissimilar concepts of predetermination and free will by interweaving them to create a postmodern sacred blend. While Christians maintain that humans have free will, many pagans accept the possibility of fate or destiny. We see this primarily in the way that Rowling blends the idea of Harry's destiny as the chosen one with his choice to accept this destiny. But can Harry do both? If he has a destiny, does he really have a choice in accepting it? In Rowling's world, the answer is yes. When Harry first hears the prophecy, he exclaims that it might not be his destiny to defeat Voldemort after all. But Dumbledore replies, "You are forgetting the next part of the prophecy, the final identifying mark of the boy who could banish Voldemort. Voldemort himself would mark him as his equal, and so he did, Harry. He chose you, not Neville." Yet Dumbledore contradicts himself again in Book 6. You see, the prophecy does not mean you have to do anything, but the prophecy caused Lord Voldemort to mark you as his equal. In other words, you are free to choose your own way, quite free to turn your back on the prophecy. So we get this conflicting blend of choice versus fate. My favorite. Harry has many opportunities to shirk this prophecy, but he doesn't. The very first choice Harry makes in accepting his fate is to enter the wizarding world. In Book 1, Hagrid notifies Harry that he's a wizard, and as Hagrid shouts at Uncle Vernon, "If he wants to go, a great muggle like you won't stop him." Though subtle, that "if" implies that Harry has a choice. He can remain in the muggle world, or he can venture into the strange new wizarding world. Of course, Harry chooses the latter, but this again marks his first decision to accept a fate, a paradoxical but effective blending of two concepts. When Harry purchases his wand, one of the most important aspects of his magical identity, the owner of the shop states, "It's really the wand that chooses the wizard, of course." Harry's wand shares a magical core with Voldemort's, linking them even more intimately than the prophecy or the scar on his head. This scene highlights the blend of destiny with free will because it seems unclear really just who chooses whom. Does Harry choose the wand, or does the wand choose Harry? Even to wand lore experts, this is a difficult topic. Upon arrival to Hogwarts, students are sorted into houses. Hogwarts has 4, and one of them, Slytherin, is historically associated with evil. When Harry places the sorting hat upon his head, he has one thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Although the sorting hat tells Harry he would do well in Slytherin, Harry continues to plead against this. The sorting hat finally places him in Gryffindor, and we can view this as Harry's first official choice to accept the path of goodness, which is his destiny, by begging the hat not to place him into Slytherin. But Harry later has doubts doubts about truly belonging to Gryffindor. Dumbledore states, "You happen to have many qualities that Salazar Slytherin prized, yet the Sorting Hat placed you in Gryffindor. You know why that was." Harry answers, "Because he asked it to which Dumbledore responds, "Exactly! Which makes you very different from Tom Riddle. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." This sounds like Harry has a choice, but Dumbledore seems to contradict this statement a few seconds later by pointing out that Harry pulled the sword of Gryffindor out of the hat when battling the basilisk, stating only a true Gryffindor could do that. So this implies a fate or a destiny. Rowling complicates the relationship between destiny and free will, refusing to take a definitive stance either way, and thus equalizing the role of both concepts in Harry's world. Therefore, these concepts to embrace his destiny in fact create his destiny. Again, a paradoxical concept. The final example of Harry choosing destiny occurs in Book 7. The prophecy suggests that in the end, Harry and Voldemort cannot both live. One must kill the other. Harry discovers to his horror that the final Horcrux exists inside himself. He represents the Horcrux Voldemort never intended to make. After hearing this revelation, Harry fully understands his fate. Quote, "Harry understood that at last he was not supposed to survive. His job was to walk calmly into death's welcoming arms." Harry has a choice: sacrifice himself for the good of humanity or run and hide. If he chooses the latter, Voldemort will continue destroying the world that Harry loves. Remarkably, Harry thinks it did not occur to him now to try to escape, to outrun Voldemort. It was over, he knew it, and all that was left was the thing itself, dying. Again, choosing the prophecy. This version of the postmodern sacred serves as yet another example of the series' ability to subvert religious hierarchy. Although its inclusion confirms a sense of familiar religious elements, it also deconstructs social hierarchies that it was meant to preserve. Over the course of the 7 books in Rowling's series, we see repeated references to the soul and its capabilities. Rowling combines elements from both the pagan and Christian traditions, once again incorporating a postmodern sacred blend. When discussing Horcruxes in Book 7, Hermione states, "Look, if I picked up a sword right now, Ron, and ran you through with it, I wouldn't damage your soul at all. Whatever happens to your body, your soul will survive, untouched." This follows the Christian idea that the soul has an existence outside of the body, and that it remains intact upon death. It also supports the pagan concept of the spirit in a similar way. In Book 3, Professor Lupin discusses the removal of the soul. He states that the person's entity disappears and they become a physical shell. You can exist without your soul, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore, no memory, no anything. You'll just exist, an empty shell, and your soul is gone, forever, lost. In Book 6, Harry and Dumbledore discuss how Voldemort could live without part of his soul. Dumbledore implies that the soul does not merely exist, but that it represents the part of a person that makes him or her a conscious being. Dumbledore points out to Harry that the 7th piece of Voldemort's soul, the only bit not turned into a Horcrux, was the part that lived a spectral existence for so many years during his exile. Without that, he has no self at all. Again, this follows both the Christian and pagan traditions. Also in Book 6, when describing the making of Horcruxes, Slughorn states that a Horcrux requires an act of evil, the supreme act of evil, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. However, Rowling makes it clear that the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. We see the ideas present in the Christian tradition, immortality of the soul, the ability for good or evil, but they're mixed with manipulation of that immortality by tampering with the soul through magic, associated with paganism. So again, we see the concept of the soul represented as a blend. Rowling also blends these traditions in her depiction of the afterlife. Rather than define the afterlife, which would require her to ascribe to a particular religious tradition and to assign a judgment value on which has authority, she offers a few glimpses at her version of the afterlife. The first we encounter is in Book 5. Harry enters a large room in the Department of Mysteries that resembles an amphitheater, and it has a large stone dais which contains an ancient-looking archway. The archway has a tattered curtain that blows back and forth continually. When Harry approaches it, he has the strangest feeling that there was someone standing right behind the veil on the other side of the archway, and he can hear whispers. Later, when Sirius dies, he disappears through this veil, never to return. Although Rowling never directly states this, we infer that this veil symbolizes the separation between the living and the dead, and that upon death, the soul departs this realm and goes on. After losing his godfather, Harry questions one of the Hogwarts ghosts about the afterlife. The ghost tells Harry that only wizards have the ability to leave an imprint of themselves upon the earth, to walk palely where their living selves once trod. I am neither here nor there. Harry asks if his godfather will return, but the ghost replies, he will not come back, he will have gone on. Of course, not having gone on himself, the ghost cannot answer what that signifies. But as readers, we recognize that this idea of going on, or departing to another realm, possibly heaven, it doesn't matter where he goes. What matters is that the soul has the capability to exist beyond the body and to move into another sphere of existence. We see another reference to the afterlife in Book 7, when Harry sacrifices himself for the others and allows Voldemort to kill him. Harry awakens in a new realm. In this place, Dumbledore appears to Harry. When Harry asks if he has died, Dumbledore replies, that is the question, isn't it? On the whole, dear boy, I think not. When Harry asks where they are, Dumbledore replies that he was going to ask Harry the same question. He says, this is, as they say, your party. When Harry asks if he has to return, Dumbledore tells him that he has a choice. He can return or he can go on. The use of the soul and afterlife within the series draws on both traditions, refusing to comply with either Christian or pagan. Rather, it favors both equally. In the instance that the soul exists, it follows both traditions, but in the manifestation of the soul and the qualities it possesses, it differs. Instead of complying with either tradition, Rowling creates a hybrid, allowing readers to escape the religious hierarchy reproduced and normalized by the culture industry, while yet retaining a semblance of the familiar and thus appealing concepts of the soul and afterlife. And now we're going to move into my final example of the postmodern sacred, where Rowling equalizes the importance of Harry's magical abilities, strongly associated with paganism, with his role as the savior or Christ figure. Although she appeals to the familiar through the inclusion of these religious elements within the series, she destabilizes the hierarchy that privileges Christianity over paganism. As Killinger points out, Harry, like Jesus, was marked from birth. Harry and Jesus share prophecies that serve as portents for their ability to save mankind from great evil. After Harry's birth, Voldemort attempts to find and destroy Harry, which Killinger relates to the Mythian story of the massacre of the innocents. Lord Voldemort has similarly sought to slay the child whose coming threatens him, but fails. Also like Christ, Harry's arrival leads to a time of celebration and joy. The most convincing argument that Killinger makes regarding Harry as a representation of the Christ figure lies first in Harry's willingness throughout the novels to sacrifice himself for others who are in danger, and in the end to give his life to save them, which is extraordinarily Christ-like. And secondly, the most convincing to myself in reading the novels for the first time was when Harry returns from death, which to me directly symbolized Jesus' resurrection after the crucifixion. Although we can view Harry as a Christ figure, we must not forget that he is also a magical being. The fact that Harry embodies both of these seemingly contradictory qualities goes back to the center of the debate that these books have generated in the press. While the pagan traditions While the pagan tradition embraces the practice of magic, the Christian tradition states that magic in any form is evil. Rowling threatens the religious hierarchy by blurring the absolute binary between Christianity as good and magic as evil. In this case, a being that is supposedly evil because of his ability to perform magic also serves as a figure of supreme goodness. The books confuse the strict Christian division, which implies that magic equals evil. Harry, the Chosen One, savior of muggles and magical creatures alike, is also evil because he does magic, which problematizes the conservative Christian perspective completely. Harry cannot see both good and evil in the Christian framework. Rowling exposes this hierarchy and that it exists, which makes her work subversive to the purpose of mass culture, which seeks to make the processes of normalizing religion invisible. In conclusion, Harry Potter, one of the most prevalent cultural icons in the last few decades, offers an excellent framework for the examining of an object of mass culture and how it reinforces social hierarchy, but also how it subverts it. The Harry Potter series illustrates an object of mass appeal that contains a postmodern sacred blend. In this case, the blending critiques religion and American culture to show that first, a hierarchy favoring Christianity exists, and secondly, to reveal the falsity of its claim on truth. Although this paper focuses upon the Potter series, it opens up the discussion of mass culture and the influence of religious ideology within the rest of American culture. In defamiliarizing one object of mass culture, I have exposed the processes that we all take for granted yet that run our lives. In order to avoid being duped at the hands of a capitalist society, you must always consider the origin and substantiations of the ideologies that regulate our culture. In short, through the words of Alistair Moody, we must maintain constant vigilance. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. So we have time for questions. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions and answers. So if anybody wants to grill Alyce, now is your time.